Hey, everyone. Get ready, because I'm about to tell you an awesome story that'll grab your attention and keep you hooked. Picture this, it's a busy morning on Flight 217, just a regular day up in the big, blue sky, or at least, that's what everyone thought. The plane was full of people rushing around, finding their seats, stuffing bags under them, and making all kinds of noise. Trays clattered as people pulled them down, and the plane made that low, humming sound planes always make when they're getting ready to fly. It was busy, loud, and a little crazy, like a school cafeteria at lunchtime. Now, in the middle of all this, there was a little old lady named Margaret Grayson. She was 90 years old, yep, 90. She was tiny, with shiny silver hair that looked soft like cotton candy. She had a big, warm smile that made you feel happy just looking at her. Margaret wore a plain sweater, nothing fancy at all, just a cozy gray one like your grandma might wear. In her hands, she held an old handbag. It was scratched up and worn out, like it had been with her for years and years. To everyone on the plane, she looked like any other old lady, maybe someone's sweet grandma flying to see her grandkids. No one paid much attention to her. They thought she was just quiet and normal. But guess what? They were so wrong. Margaret had a secret, a huge, amazing secret that could turn this whole flight into a wild adventure. Let me tell you more about what was going on. The plane was packed with all kinds of people. There were kids bouncing in their seats, moms trying to keep them still, and dads digging through bags for snacks. Some people were already putting on headphones, ready to watch movies or listen to music. Others were flipping through magazines or staring out the little windows at the clouds. It was a normal flight, the kind you've probably been on before. Everyone was doing their own thing, and no one had any idea that something big was about to happen. Then there was Tammy. Oh, Tammy. She was the flight attendant, the one walking up and down the aisle telling everyone what to do. Tammy wasn't quiet or gentle like Margaret. No way. She had a loud voice and a sharp tongue, which means she said things in a mean, snappy way. Her attitude was even sharper. She acted like she was the boss of everything. Tammy had been working on planes for a long time, maybe 5 or 10 years, and she thought she knew it all. She walked around like she owned the whole plane, like it was her house and everyone else was just visiting. Sit down. Tammy yelled at a man who was still standing. Put that bag away, she barked at a lady trying to shove her suitcase under her seat. She rolled her eyes a lot, like she was annoyed with every single person on the plane. Her dark hair was pulled back tight in a ponytail, and her uniform was super neat, but her face? It looked grumpy all the time. Most people didn't argue with her. They were too tired or too nervous to say anything back. When Tammy told them to do something, they just did it fast. She was loud and bossy, and she made sure everyone knew she was in charge. Or at least, she thought she was. But Margaret? She was different. She didn't jump or hurry when Tammy shouted. She just sat there in her seat, quiet as a mouse. Her hands rested on her old handbag, and her wise old eyes, those bright, smart eyes, watched everything. She didn't say a word, not yet. She didn't need to. Margaret was calm, like a still pond on a sunny day, while Tammy was like a big, noisy storm. Something was brewing, something exciting, and nobody on that plane had a clue what was coming. Not Tammy, not the passengers, not even the pilots up front. Only Margaret knew, and she wasn't telling yet. Let's zoom in on that plane a little more. It was a big one, with rows and rows of seats stretching all the way back. The seats were blue, a little scratchy, and packed close together. Overhead, the bins were stuffed with bags, big ones, small ones, even a guitar case someone had squeezed in. The air smelled like coffee and pretzels, the kind they always give you on flights. Out the windows, you could see the ground getting farther away as the plane climbed higher and higher into the sky. The clouds looked like fluffy white pillows, and the sun peeked through them, making everything bright. Margaret's seat was near the middle of the plane, not too close to the front or the back. She had a window seat, which was perfect for her because she liked looking outside. Next to her sat a young guy with headphones on, bobbing his head to music. He didn't even glance at Margaret, he was too busy with his songs. Across the aisle, a little girl kept peeking over her seat, giggling at her brother, who was making funny faces. Everyone was busy with their own stuff, and Margaret just blended in. She looked so normal, so quiet, that no one would ever guess she was special. But she was. Oh, she was. Tammy kept marching up and down the aisle, her shoes clicking on the floor. She carried a little notepad, but she didn't write much in it. Mostly, she used it to point at people when she was mad. "You fix that seat belt," she'd say, jabbing the air with her pen. Or "Hey, no snacks yet, wait your turn." She didn't smile, not even once. The other flight attendants were busy too, but they weren't as loud as Tammy. They poured drinks and handed out blankets, trying to keep everyone happy. Tammy didn't care about happy. She just wanted everyone to listen to her. Now, let's talk about Margaret again. She wasn't loud or pushy like Tammy. She didn't need to be. She sat there with her silver hair shining under the plane's lights, her smile soft and kind. Her sweater was a little too big for her, the sleeves hanging over her hands, but she didn't mind. Her handbag sat on her lap, and every now and then, she'd pat it gently, like it was her best friend. That bag looked old and beat up, but to Margaret, it was important. Why? Well, that's part of the secret, isn't it? We're not going to find out just yet, but I'll give you a tiny hint, that bag had something to do with who Margaret really was. The plane kept flying, smooth and steady, but something felt different. You couldn't see it or hear it, but you could feel it, like when you know a surprise is coming but you don't know what it is. Margaret felt it too. She didn't fidget or look nervous. She just watched. Her eyes followed Tammy as she bossed people around. They watched the passengers as they settled in. They even watched the clouds outside, like she was thinking about something big. What was she thinking? What was her secret? Oh, it was a good one, I promise. Tammy didn't notice Margaret watching her. She was too busy being loud and important. She didn't see the way Margaret's eyes sparkled, like she knew something Tammy didn't. Most people didn't notice Margaret at all. To them, she was just an old lady, someone who moved slow and talked soft. They didn't think she could do anything exciting. Boy, were they in for a surprise. This flight wasn't going to be ordinary for long, and it all started with Margaret and her secret. So, picture this plane in your head, the noisy trays, the grumpy Tammy, the busy passengers, and little Margaret sitting quietly with her big secret. It's like a puzzle, and we're just starting to put the pieces together. Something was brewing, like when you mix soda and candy and wait for it to fizz up. It wasn't loud yet, but it was coming. Margaret was ready, even if no one else was. Tammy thought she was the queen of the plane, but she had no idea what was about to hit her. "Hey, you. Yeah, you reading this? Where are you right now? Are you at home, at school, maybe on a plane yourself? Drop it in the comments below, I want to know. This story's just getting started, and trust me, it's going to get wild. Margaret's secret is huge, and when it comes out, everything's going to change. Can you guess what it might be? Maybe she's a superhero in disguise. Or maybe she's got a magic trick up her sleeve. Whatever it is, it's going to make Tammy wish she'd been a little nicer. The plane kept humming along, high above the ground. The passengers kept chatting and snacking. Tammy kept bossing everyone around. And Margaret? She kept waiting, her wise eyes seeing everything. This was no ordinary day, no ordinary flight. Something big was on the way, and it all started with that tiny old lady in the plain gray sweater. Stick around, because you're not going to believe what happens next. Okay, everyone, here we go. The plane took off into the sky, zooming up high above the clouds. Everything seemed fine at first. The engines roared, the seats shook a little, and then it was smooth sailing. But things got bumpy fast, not because of the plane, oh no. It was the people inside that made everything wild. The flight had barely started, and already, trouble was bubbling up like a pot of water boiling over on the stove. Tammy, the loud flight attendant with the sharp voice, was on the move. She strutted down the aisle. That means she walked all big and bossy, like she was the most important person ever. Her shoes clicked loud on the floor, and her eyes were like lasers, glaring at anyone who dared to look at her funny. If someone asked for something simple, like an extra blanket because they were cold, Tammy didn't smile or help nicely. Nope. She'd snap, "Wait your turn," and keep walking. If a guy raised his hand for a cup of water, she'd huff and roll her eyes, like he was asking for $1 million. She acted like every little question was a huge bother to her. The plane was full of people, all squeezed into their seats. Some were kids coloring in books, some were grown ups reading, and others were just trying to nap. But Tammy didn't care who they were, she bossed them all around the same way. She'd say stuff like, "Put that down," or "Sit still," and her voice was so loud it echoed through the whole plane. Everyone could hear her, and most people just shrank down in their seats, hoping she wouldn't yell at them next. Tammy thought she was the queen of this flight, and she wanted everyone to know it. Then she got to Margaret's seat. Oh boy, this was when things really heated up. Margaret, that tiny 90-year-old lady with the silver hair and gentle smile, was sitting there all quiet. She wasn't bothering anyone, just looking out the window at the fluffy clouds. Her old handbag, the one that was scratched up and worn out, was tucked under her seat. Well, almost tucked. It stuck out just a little, barely enough to notice. But Tammy noticed. She stopped right there in the aisle, her hands on her hips, staring down at Margaret like she'd done something awful. "Ma'am," Tammy said, her voice full of annoyance, like she was already mad before she even started talking. "Your bag's too big for under the seat. Move it. Now." She didn't say it nicely, not even a little. It was like an order, the kind you'd give a dog when it's being naughty. The word now came out sharp, like a poke with a stick. Everyone nearby went quiet, waiting to see what would happen. Margaret didn't jump or get scared. She just looked up at Tammy with those calm, wise eyes of hers. She wasn't mad or upset, not yet. "Oh, dear," she said in her soft, sweet voice, "I'll fix it in a moment." Her words were gentle, like a grandma talking to a little kid. She didn't yell back or argue. She just smiled a tiny bit, like she wasn't worried at all. Her hands rested on her lap, and she didn't even move to grab the bag right away. She was so peaceful, like a sleepy cat on a sunny porch. But Tammy? She wasn't happy with that answer. Not one bit. "No," she barked, leaning closer to Margaret. "You'll fix it now, or I'll toss it in the back myself." Her voice got louder, and her face turned all red, like she was about to explode. She pointed at the bag with her finger, jabbing the air like it was the bag's fault. Toss it in the back meant she'd grab it and throw it somewhere far away, maybe all the way to where the suitcases were kept. She didn't care that Margaret was old or that the bag might be special. To Tammy, it was just another thing to be mad about. A few people around them turned their heads. You could hear little whispers starting up, like a breeze rustling leaves. "Did she just say that?" one lady mumbled to her friend. "Who talks to an old lady like that?" a man whispered, shaking his head. The guy next to Margaret, the one with the headphones, even pulled one earbud out to listen. Everyone was shocked. I mean, come on. Margaret was 90 years old, tiny and sweet, and here was Tammy acting like she was some big troublemaker. It didn't seem fair at all. Margaret didn't fight back, though. She didn't raise her voice or tell Tammy off. She just nodded her head a little, like she was saying, "Okay, okay." Then she leaned down slowly, because she was old and her back wasn't so strong, and started to push the bag farther under the seat. Her hands shook a tiny bit as she worked. They were wrinkled and small, but they moved with care. She didn't rush, even with Tammy standing there glaring at her. She tucked the bag in nice and neat, making sure it didn't stick out anymore. Then she sat back up, brushed her silver hair out of her face, and gave Tammy another little smile. But here's the cool part: if you looked really close, like super duper close, you'd see something in Margaret's eyes. It wasn't just calm or kindness. There was a tiny spark, like a little fire starting to glow. It was something strong, something secret, hidden deep inside her. Her hands might have trembled, and her voice might have been soft, but that spark? It said she wasn't weak. It said she wasn't scared. It said Tammy had no idea who she was talking to. Oh, Tammy was in for a big surprise, but she didn't know it yet. Tammy didn't see the spark. She didn't look close enough. She just huffed again, like she'd won some kind of battle, and turned to stomp down the aisle. Finally, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Margaret to hear. She thought she'd put Margaret in her place, like Margaret was just another passenger she could boss around. She didn't think twice about that old lady with the worn-out bag. To Tammy, Margaret was nothing special, just someone to yell at and forget about. The plane kept flying, high up in the sky. The clouds outside were white and puffy, like marshmallows floating around. Inside, though, the air felt heavy not because it was hot, but because of Tammy. She kept walking up and down, looking for more people to snap at. "Hey, you," she'd yell at a kid who dropped a crayon. "Pick that up." Or "No, you can't have more juice yet," to a lady who was thirsty. She was like a grumpy teacher on a bad day, making everyone feel small and nervous. Margaret watched it all. She didn't say anything, but her eyes followed Tammy everywhere. She saw how Tammy treated people like they were annoying bugs she wanted to squish. She saw the way passengers shrank back when Tammy got close, like they were afraid of her loud voice. Margaret didn't shrink, though. She sat straight in her seat, her hands resting on her bag again. That spark in her eyes stayed there, glowing just a little brighter every time Tammy was mean to someone. The other passengers started to notice Tammy's attitude too. The whispers got louder. "She's so rude," a mom said to her husband, keeping her voice low so Tammy wouldn't hear. "Why's she so mad all the time?" a kid asked his big sister, who just shrugged. People didn't like Tammy, but they didn't know what to do about it. She was the flight attendant, after all. She was supposed to be in charge. So they just sat there, taking it, hoping she'd calm down soon. But Margaret? She wasn't like the others. She didn't whisper or complain. She didn't look scared or mad. She just watched, quiet and steady. Her silver hair shone under the plane's lights, and her smile stayed soft, even after Tammy yelled at her. It was like she knew something big that no one else did. That bag she'd tucked away. It wasn't just any old bag. It was part of her secret, part of why she wasn't afraid of Tammy. But we're not going to find out what it is yet. Nope, that's coming later. Tammy kept being her grumpy self. She didn't care that people were whispering about her. She didn't care that they looked at her funny when she walked by. She just kept strutting, kept barking orders, kept acting like she was the boss of the whole world. Every time she passed Margaret's seat, she'd give her a quick glare, like she was daring Margaret to try something. But Margaret didn't budge. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, calm as ever, with that little spark in her eyes growing stronger. The plane hummed along, the engines making a low rumble. The flight was long, and there were hours left to go. People settled into their seats, some pulling out snacks or books to pass the time. The kids across the aisle started playing a game with their hands, giggling quietly so Tammy wouldn't hear. The guy next to Margaret put his headphones back on, tapping his foot to the beat. Life on the plane went on, even with Tammy stomping around like a big, angry bear. But something was building. You couldn't see it yet, but you could feel it like when you know a storm's coming because the air gets all tingly. Tammy thought she was in control, but she wasn't. Not really. Margaret was the one who held the real power, even if no one knew it yet. Every mean word Tammy said, every glare she gave, was digging her into a deeper hole. She was picking a fight with the wrong person, and she didn't even realize it. So, what do you think? Was Tammy about to dig her own grave? I mean, she was being so mean to Margaret, and Margaret didn't even blink. That spark in her eyes, it's a clue, isn't it? Something's coming, something huge, and Tammy's not going to like it one bit. Margaret's not just some old lady with a shaky voice. She's got a secret, and it's going to change everything. What could it be? Maybe she's a spy. Or maybe she's super rich. Whatever it is, Tammy's in big trouble, and she doesn't even know it yet. The plane kept flying, the clouds kept drifting by, and the tension kept growing. Tammy versus Margaret, it was like a quiet little war starting right there in the middle of Flight 217. Who was going to win? Who was going to lose? Oh, it's going to be so good when we find out. Stick with me, because this story's just getting started, and the best part's still ahead. Alright, friends, let's keep this story rolling. Hours passed on Flight 217, and things were getting crazier by the minute. The plane was still high up in the sky, zooming through the clouds, but inside, it was like a little tornado was spinning. Tammy, that loud and grumpy flight attendant, wasn't calming down, not even a little. Nope, her attitude was getting worse and worse, like a balloon blowing up bigger and bigger until it's ready to pop. Tammy was on a roll, stomping up and down the aisle like she owned the place. She didn't care who you were if you crossed her path. Watch out. There was this mom sitting a few rows up, holding a tiny baby who wouldn't stop crying. The baby was loud, sure, but babies cry sometimes, right? Most people would understand that. Not Tammy. She marched right over and snapped, "Can't you keep that kid quiet? It's driving everyone nuts." Her voice was sharp, like a teacher yelling at a kid who forgot their homework. The mom's face turned red, and she hugged her baby closer, trying to shush it. Tammy didn't wait to see if it worked. She just turned and kept walking, muttering something mean under her breath. Then there was this guy a few seats back. He looked tired, like he'd had a long day already. He raised his hand, super polite, and said, "Excuse me, miss, can you help me with my bag? It's stuck." Tammy didn't even stop walking. She glanced at him, rolled her eyes, and said, "Figure it out yourself," before zooming off. The guy just sat there, confused, tugging at his bag all alone. People around him started whispering, like, "Wow, she's so rude." But Tammy didn't hear them, or if she did, she didn't care. And get this, it gets even wilder. A little later, Tammy was carrying a tray of coffee cups down the aisle. She was moving fast, not looking where she was going. This poor guy in a blue shirt was just sitting there, minding his own business, when splash. Tammy tripped a tiny bit, and hot coffee spilled right onto his lap. He jumped up, yelling, "Ow, that's hot." His pants were all wet, and he looked mad. You'd think Tammy would say sorry, right? Nope. She just glared at him, like it was his fault, and said, "Watch where you're sitting next time." Then she kept walking, leaving him there with a big coffee stain and no napkins. The people nearby gasped. Can you believe she didn't even say sorry? But here's where it gets really juicy. With Margaret, it wasn't just random meanness like with everyone else. Oh no, with Margaret, it was personal. Tammy seemed to have it out for her, like Margaret was her number one target. Every single time Tammy passed Margaret's seat, and I mean every time she found something to pick at, it was like she couldn't help herself. One time, she stopped and pointed at Margaret's tray table, the little one that folds down from the seat in front of you. "Your tray's down, put it up," she barked, even though Margaret wasn't even using it. It was just sitting there, not bothering anyone. Another time, she leaned over and snapped, "Stop fidgeting, you're bothering people." But Margaret wasn't fidgeting at all. She was just sitting still, her hands on her lap. Tammy was making stuff up just to be mean. Margaret didn't argue, though. She didn't say a single word back. She just stayed quiet, like a statue, taking it all in. If Tammy said, "Put it up," Margaret would nod and slowly lift the tray. If Tammy said, "Stop moving," Margaret would sit even stiller, her hands resting on her old handbag. She didn't fight, not yet. Her face stayed calm, and that gentle smile never went away. But her eyes, oh, those wise old eyes, were watching everything. They followed Tammy up and down the aisle, seeing every mean thing she did. Margaret wasn't loud or mad, but she wasn't weak either. She was waiting for something, and it was going to be big. Here's the thing Tammy didn't know, Margaret wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. Nope. While Tammy was busy yelling and bossing people around, Margaret was listening. She heard every word Tammy said, not just to her, but to everyone. One time, Tammy stopped near the front of the plane to talk to another flight attendant, a younger girl with a ponytail. Tammy leaned in close and bragged, "I run this plane like a boss. These people don't know what to do without me." She laughed, all proud of herself, like she was the smartest person ever. The other flight attendant nodded, but she didn't look so sure. Margaret heard it all, though. Her seat wasn't far away, and her ears were sharp, even if she was 90 years old. She didn't miss a thing. Margaret saw stuff too, not just heard it. She watched how Tammy smirked when people looked away from her. That smirk was like a sneaky little grin, the kind you make when you think you got away with something. When Tammy snapped at the mom with the baby, she'd turn around and smirk, like she was happy to make the mom feel bad. When she ignored the guy with the stuck bag, she smirked again, like it was a game to her. Margaret's eyes caught every one of those smirks, and she didn't forget them. She was keeping track, but how? That's where it gets really exciting. See, Margaret had this little notebook. It was small, about the size of your hand, with a brown cover that looked old and worn, like her handbag. She kept it tucked inside her sweater at first, so no one noticed it. But after Tammy yelled at her about the tray table, Margaret reached into her sweater and pulled it out. She opened it up on her lap, real slow, so Tammy wouldn't see. Then she grabbed a tiny pen from her bag, it was one of those short ones you get at the store, and started scribbling something down. Her hand moved fast, even though it shook a little. The pen scratched across the paper, making little lines and words. What was she writing? Was she making a list? Was she planning something sneaky? Nobody knew, not Tammy, not the guy next to her with the headphones, not even the little kids giggling across the aisle. The other passengers didn't notice Margaret's notebook. They were too busy with their own stuff. The mom with the crying baby was rocking it back and forth, whispering, "SHH, SHH." The guy with the coffee stain was wiping his pants with a tissue he found in his pocket, grumbling to himself. The kids across the aisle were playing with a little toy car, rolling it back and forth on their tray. Everyone was distracted, and Tammy was too loud to care about anything quiet like a notebook. But Margaret kept writing. Every time Tammy said something mean or smirked at someone, Margaret's pen moved again. Scribble, scribble, scribble. Her eyes stayed on Tammy, and her hands stayed busy. The plane kept flying, and the hours stretched on. The sky outside got darker as the sun started to dip lower, painting the clouds orange and pink. Inside, the lights were on, making everything look bright and cozy, except it didn't feel cozy, not with Tammy around. The tension was building, like a storm ready to break. You know how the air feels all heavy before it rains? That's what it was like on the plane. People were getting tired of Tammy's yelling. They were starting to look at each other, like, can you believe her? But no one said anything out loud, not yet. They just waited, hoping she'd stop. Margaret didn't look tired, though. She didn't look mad or scared either. She just kept watching and writing. Her notebook was filling up, page after page. Sometimes she'd stop, look at what she wrote, and nod a little, like she was happy with it. Then she'd tuck the notebook back into her sweater and sit there, hands on her bag, waiting for Tammy to pass by again. And Tammy always did. She'd walk by, glare at Margaret, and say something like, "Your sweater's crooked, fix it," even though it wasn't. Margaret would just nod, adjust her sleeve a tiny bit, and wait for Tammy to leave. Then out came the notebook again. Scribble, scribble. What was she up to? Oh, it's so fun to guess. Maybe she was writing down every mean thing Tammy did, like a report card for bad behavior. Maybe she was making a plan, like a secret mission. Or maybe she was just keeping busy so she wouldn't get mad. Whatever it was important. That notebook wasn't just for fun, it was part of Margaret's big secret, the one Tammy didn't know about. And that secret? It was getting closer to coming out, like a present you're dying to unwrap but have to wait for. Tammy kept being Tammy. She didn't see the notebook, didn't see Margaret watching her. She was too busy strutting around, acting like the boss of everything. She'd yell at someone for sneezing too loud, or snap at a kid for dropping a crayon. "Pick that up, now," she'd say, pointing like she was a queen giving orders. The other flight attendants tried to keep things calm, they handed out water and smiled at people, but Tammy was like a big dark cloud over the whole plane. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't say it. Margaret felt it too, but she didn't let it bother her. She stayed cool and quiet, like a superhero hiding their powers. Her silver hair glowed under the lights, and her smile stayed soft, even when Tammy was mean. That spark in her eyes, the one we saw before, was still there, and it was getting brighter. Every time Tammy picked on her, that spark grew a little more. It was like Margaret was saying, "Go ahead, keep going, I've got something up my sleeve." But she didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. Her notebook said it for her. The tension kept building, higher and higher. The passengers were whispering more now. "She's so mean," one lady said to her friend. "I wish someone would tell her off," a guy muttered, shaking his head. The kids across the aisle stopped giggling and peeked at Tammy, like they were scared she'd yell at them next. The plane felt like a big pot of soup, simmering and bubbling, just waiting to spill over. And Margaret? She was right in the middle of it, calm and ready. So, can you guess what Margaret was up to? That notebook, That spark in her eyes, what did it all mean? Was she going to do something big? Was she going to teach Tammy a lesson? Oh, it's so exciting to think about. Tammy thought she was the boss, but Margaret was the one with the real power, she just hadn't shown it yet. The storm was coming, and when it hit, it was going to be amazing. Stick with me, because this story's about to get even better. Okay, friends, hold on tight, this is the part where everything goes wild. The plane had been flying for hours, high up in the sky, and now it was finally time to land. The wheels hit the ground with a little bump, and the plane rolled to a stop. Everyone was ready to get off. People started standing up, stretching their legs, and grabbing their bags from the seats and the bins above. The plane was noisy again, zippers zipping, kids talking, and trays clattering as people put them away. It was like a busy classroom when the bell rings, everyone moving at once. Tammy, that grumpy flight attendant with the loud voice, was still acting like she was in charge. She strutted down the aisle one last time, her shoes clicking on the floor. She looked at everyone with her mean glare, like she wanted them to hurry up just so she could boss them around more. And then she got to Margaret's seat. Oh boy, this was at the moment everything flipped upside down. Margaret was still sitting there, tiny and quiet, her silver hair shining under the plane's lights. She had her old handbag on her lap, holding it with both hands. She wasn't moving fast, she couldn't, because she was 90 years old, and old people take their time. But Tammy didn't care about that. She marched right up to Margaret and said, loud enough for the whole plane to hear, "Move it, Grandma, we don't have all day." Her voice was sharp and rude, like she was yelling at a kid who wasn't listening. Everyone nearby stopped what they were doing and looked over. You could feel the air get tense, like something big was about to happen. Margaret didn't jump up. She didn't even look scared. She just stayed calm, like always. But Tammy wasn't done. She wanted Margaret to move faster, and get this, she did something crazy. Tammy reached out with her hand and slapped Margaret's arm. It wasn't a hard slap, not like in a fight, but it was enough to make a little smack sound. "Hurry up already!" Tammy snapped, her face all red and annoyed. The whole cabin, the inside of the plane, went gasp. Everyone sucked in their breath at the same time, like they couldn't believe what they just saw. A few people even said, "Oh no," out loud. Who slaps an old lady? Especially one as sweet as Margaret? The plane got super quiet after that. You could hear a pin drop, it was so still. All eyes were on Margaret and Tammy. The guy next to Margaret pulled off his headphones, his mouth open wide. The mom with the baby stopped rocking it, staring like she was in shock. The kids across the aisle peeked over their seats, their eyes big and round. Tammy stood there, her hands still in the air a little, like she didn't even care what she'd done. She thought she was tough, like she could do whatever she wanted. But she was so wrong. Margaret moved slow, like she always did. She put her shaky hands on her bag and gripped it tight. Then she stood up, one little step at a time. Her back was bent a bit, and her sweater hung loose on her tiny body. She didn't rush, even with Tammy glaring at her. The plane stayed silent, everyone watching, waiting to see what she'd do. Was she going to cry? Was she going to yell? Nobody knew, not yet. When Margaret was finally standing, she turned to face Tammy. Her wise old eyes looked right into Tammy's mean ones. Then she spoke, clear as day, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Young lady," she said, her voice soft but strong, "I think it's time you learned some manners." It wasn't a shout or a scream, it was calm, like a teacher telling you something important. But it hit hard. You could feel the words in the air, like they carried a big weight. Tammy blinked, surprised. She didn't expect Margaret to talk back. And then get this, she laughed. Tammy actually laughed, aloud, ha, like she thought it was a joke. "Manners," she said, smirking. "From you." But that laugh didn't last long. Oh no, it got wiped right off her face. Because right then, something amazing happened. The plane door opened with a whoosh, and a man in a fancy suit rushed inside. He was tall, with shiny shoes and a tie that looked super important. He pushed past people in the aisle, moving fast, like he couldn't wait another second. "Mrs. Grayson," he shouted, his voice loud and excited. "Mrs. Grayson, we've been waiting for you." He stopped right next to Margaret, almost bumping into Tammy, who had to step back fast. Tammy's smirk was gone now. Her jaw dropped her mouth fell open so wide you could see her teeth. She looked at the man, then at Margaret, then back at the man. "Who's Mrs. Grayson?" she muttered, her voice all shaky. She was confused, and for the first time, she didn't sound so bossy. The man in the suit didn't even look at Tammy at first. He smiled big at Margaret, like she was the most special person ever. Then he turned to Tammy, and his smile went away. He glared at her, his eyes narrow and mad. "This," he said, pointing at Margaret, "is Margaret Grayson, the chairwoman of Sky High Airlines. She owns this plane, this crew, and oh yeah, your job." Boom. There it was, the big secret was out. The whole plane went nuts. People gasped again, louder this time. "What?" someone yelled from the back. "She's the boss," a lady whispered to her friend. The guy with the headphones dropped them on his lap, staring at Margaret like she was a superhero. The kids across the aisle giggled and clapped, like it was the best surprise ever. Margaret wasn't just some old lady, she was the chairwoman. That means she was the big boss of the whole airline, the one who made all the rules and owned everything. This plane? Hers. The crew? Hers. Tammy's job? Yep, hers too. Tammy's face changed fast. All the color drained out of it. She went from red and mad to white and scared in 2 seconds flat. Her eyes got huge, like she'd seen a ghost. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She just stood there, frozen, like a statue. Margaret stepped forward, her shaky legs moving slow but steady. Her gentle smile was gone now. Her face was serious, like a grandma who's done playing nice. She looked right at Tammy and said, "I've been watching you all day. And I've seen enough." Those words were like thunder, quiet thunder, but strong. Everyone felt them. Margaret's voice wasn't loud, but it carried power, real power. She'd been watching Tammy the whole flight, every mean word, every smirk, every time she yelled at someone. And now Tammy knew it. The big secret was out, and it hit Tammy like a ton of bricks. She wasn't the boss anymore. Margaret was. And Tammy? She was toast. The man in the suit stood next to Margaret, nodding like he agreed with everything she said. He looked at Tammy like she was in big trouble, and she was. The passengers started talking all at once, their voices buzzing like bees. "She owns the airline," a man said, shaking his head. "No wonder she didn't fight back," a lady added, smiling at Margaret. The mom with the baby looked happy, like she was glad someone finally stood up to Tammy. The kids across the aisle whispered, "She's so cool," and giggled some more. Tammy tried to talk again. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice all wobbly. But it was too late. Margaret didn't even look at her now. She turned to the man in the suit and said, "Let's go." Her voice was still calm, but you could tell she meant business. The man nodded and held out his arm to help her walk. Margaret took it, her shaky hand holding on tight, and started moving toward the door. Her old handbag dangled from her other arm, swinging a little as she went. The plane was still buzzing with noise. People couldn't stop talking about what just happened. "She's the chairwoman," someone said again, like they needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "Tammy's in so much trouble," another person laughed. The guy with the coffee stain on his pants grinned big, like he was happy to see Tammy get what she deserved. Even the other flight attendants peeked out from the back, their eyes wide. They hadn't known either, but now they did, and they looked at Margaret with big, surprised smiles. Tammy just stood there, all alone in the aisle. Her hands were shaking now, and her face was still white. She looked around, like she wanted someone to help her, but no one did. The passengers were too busy cheering for Margaret, quiet cheering, but you could feel it. The kids clapped their hands, and the mom with the baby nodded at Margaret, like she was saying thank you without words. Tammy's big, bossy world had just flipped upside down, and she didn't know what to do. Margaret kept walking, slow and steady, with the man in the suit by her side. She didn't look back at Tammy, not once. She didn't need to. Her secret was out, and it was the best surprise ever. She wasn't just an old lady with a worn-out bag. She was Margaret Grayson, the boss of Sky High Airlines, and she'd been watching everything. That little notebook she'd been writing in? That spark in her eyes? It all made sense now. She'd seen how mean Tammy was, and she wasn't going to let it slide. The plane door was wide open, and you could see the airport outside, bright lights and people waiting. Margaret stepped off the plane, her silver hair shining one last time under the cabin lights. The man in the suit followed her, talking fast about something important. The passengers watched her go, still whispering and smiling. "She's amazing," a lady said. Tammy had no idea, a guy added, laughing. It was like a big party now, everyone happy that the truth was out. Tammy sank down into an empty seat, her head in her hands. She didn't look bossy anymore, she looked small and scared. Her sharp voice was gone, and her mean glare was nowhere to be seen. She'd messed with the wrong person, and now she knew it. Margaret had turned everything around with just a few words and one big secret. Boom, that was it. The climax, the big reveal, the moment we'd all been waiting for. So, how do you think Tammy felt right then? Can you imagine it? She went from thinking she was the queen of the plane to finding out she'd been rude to the real boss. Her face was white, her hands were shaky, and her big attitude was smashed to pieces. Was she mad? Scared? Sorry? Maybe all of those things at once. Margaret didn't yell or fight, she just told the truth, and that was enough to make Tammy crumble. What a twist, right? This story's getting so good, and there's more to come, stick around. Hey, friends, we're at the end of this wild ride, and it's time to see how it all wraps up. The plane had landed, and the big secret was out. Margaret Grayson wasn't just a little old lady, she was the boss of Sky High Airlines. Now, things were moving fast at the airport. It was buzzing like a beehive, full of noise and people running around. Lights were bright, and you could hear suitcases rolling and voices talking everywhere. Margaret stepped off the plane, slow and steady, her shaky hands holding her old handbag. The man in the suit walked right beside her, helping her along. He looked proud, like he was happy to be with the real boss. Tammy. Oh, she wasn't so tough anymore. Not even a little. She stood there in the aisle, all alone, her face white and her eyes big. She didn't look like the loud, bossy flight attendant who'd been yelling at everyone. Now she looked small and scared, like a kid who got caught being naughty. Wait, I didn't mean it, she stammered, her voice all shaky and weak. She reached out a little, like she wanted to grab Margaret and say sorry, but it was way too late for that. Margaret didn't even turn around to look at her. Tammy's words just floated away, useless, like a balloon that popped. Margaret stopped for a second before leaving the plane. She turned to the crew, the other flight attendants who'd been watching everything. They were standing near the back, their eyes wide and their mouths shut. Margaret's voice came out soft but strong, like a grandma who means business. This airline is about respect, she said, looking at each of them. Respect for passengers, respect for each other. Anyone who forgets that doesn't belong here. Her words were clear, like a rule written in big letters. The crew nodded fast, like they understood. They didn't want to mess up, not after seeing what happened to Tammy. Then Margaret walked off, the man in the suit helping her down the steps. The passengers still on the plane watched her go, and they started to cheer. It wasn't a loud cheer, like at a sports game, but a happy one. Some people clapped their hands, tap tap tap, smiling big. The mom with the baby rocked her little one and nodded, like she was saying good job without words. The guy with the coffee stain on his pants, he grinned so wide you could see all his teeth. The kids across the aisle giggled and clapped too, like it was a fun show. That little old lady they'd all ignored? She'd just turned the tables on everyone, she showed them who was really in charge. By the next morning, big news spread fast. Tammy was out of a job. Yep, gone, just like that. The airline didn't wait long, Margaret made sure of it. Tammy's name was whispered around Sky High Airlines like a warning. Don't be like Tammy, people said in the break rooms and at the desks. She was mean, and look what happened. Everyone who worked there heard the story, how Tammy yelled at passengers, how she slapped Margaret's arm, and how Margaret turned out to be the chairwoman. It was like a lesson, be nice, or you're out. The passengers who'd been on flight 217 couldn't stop talking about it either. When they got off the plane, they told their families and friends. You won't believe what happened, they'd say, their eyes big with excitement. This old lady was the boss the whole time, and she got rid of the mean flight attendant. Some even clapped again as they left the airport, still amazed at Margaret. She didn't look strong or loud, but she'd flipped everything upside down with just a few words. The crew on the plane? They straightened up fast after that day. No more lazy attitudes or rude looks. They knew Margaret wasn't afraid to step in again. If the chairwoman herself came on a flight and watched them, they'd better be on their best behavior. They smiled at passengers now, handed out blankets with a "here you go," and said please and thank you. It was like a whole new team, all because of Margaret. She didn't have to yell or fight, she just showed them what respect looked like, and they got the message loud and clear. Justice. Oh, it was served piping hot, like a pizza fresh from the oven. Tammy had been mean to everyone, snapping at the mom, ignoring the guy with the bag, spilling coffee on that poor man, and picking on Margaret over and over. She thought she could get away with it, but nope. Margaret watched it all, waited, and then bam, she dropped the truth. Tammy lost her job, and Margaret made sure the airline stayed a place where people were treated right. It felt so good to see the mean one get what she deserved and the nice one win. The airport kept buzzing as Margaret left, her silver hair shining one last time before she disappeared into the crowd. The man in the suit talked to her about important stuff, and she nodded, calm as ever. She didn't need to brag or shout, she'd already done what she came to do. The passengers went home with a story they'd never forget, and the crew learned a lesson they'd always remember. Tammy. She was gone, and no one missed her mean voice or grumpy face. So, there it was, justice, all wrapped up like a perfect present. Margaret, the little old lady with the big secret, showed everyone that being kind and fair is what matters. And Tammy? She learned the hard way that being rude doesn't pay off. What a way to end the flight, right? Everyone got what they deserved, and it felt just right. Hey, friends. We've made it to the end of this awesome story, and now it's time to think about what it all means. This tale about Margaret and Tammy was full of surprises, wasn't it? So, what's the big lesson here? Let's figure it out together. It's something cool that you can carry with you every day. Think about this: sometimes the person you think is weak or small is actually the one holding all the power. That's what happened with Margaret. She was tiny, 90 years old, with shaky hands and a quiet voice. Everyone on the plane, passengers, Tammy, even the crew, thought she was just a regular old lady, someone who didn't matter much. They saw her plain sweater and her worn-out handbag and figured she couldn't do anything big. But oh, were they wrong? Margaret wasn't weak at all. She was the chairwoman of Sky High Airlines, the big boss. She had all the power, even if no one could see it at first. She didn't need to shout or fight to show it either. She just waited, watched everything Tammy did, and then, at the perfect moment, she won. That's so cool, right? Now look at Tammy. She was loud and bossy, snapping at people and acting like she was the strongest one on the plane. She thought being mean made her tough, like it put her in charge. She yelled at the mom with the baby, ignored the guy who needed help, and even slapped Margaret's arm. Tammy was sure she could do whatever she wanted, and no one would stop her. But guess what? Being mean didn't make her strong, it made her lose everything. She learned the hard way that picking on people doesn't work out. When Margaret told everyone who she really was, Tammy's big attitude fell apart. She lost her job, and no one felt sorry for her. Being mean didn't make her a winner, it made her a loser. So here's the big idea: don't judge people too fast. Next time you're quick to think someone's not important, like if they're quiet, or small, or just different, think twice. You never know who they really are. Margaret looked like a sweet old grandma, but she was the boss of a whole airline. Tammy didn't see that coming, and it got her in big trouble. Maybe the kid sitting next to you in class, the one who doesn't talk much, is super smart or really brave. Maybe the person you pass on the street has a secret talent you'd never guess. People can surprise you, just like Margaret surprised Tammy and everyone on that plane. This story makes you think, doesn't it? It's like a little reminder to be kind and give everyone a chance. Margaret didn't get mad or yell back when Tammy was rude. She stayed calm and smart. She watched and waited, and when the time was right, she showed her power. That's real strength. You don't have to be loud or pushy to be strong. You can be quiet and still win, just like Margaret did. And Tammy? She thought being mean was the way to go, but it just dug her into a hole she couldn't climb out of. Being kind is way better. It keeps you out of trouble and makes people like you more. What if we all tried to be a little like Margaret? Imagine if, next time someone's mean to you, You don't yell back, you just stay cool and figure out the smart way to handle it. Or if you see someone who looks different or quiet, you don't laugh or ignore them, you say hi and see who they really are. You might make a new friend, or find out something amazing. The world would be a nicer place if we didn't judge people so fast, right? Margaret showed us that, and it's a lesson we can use every single day at school, at home, or even on a plane. So, what did you think of this twist? Wasn't it wild when Margaret turned out to be the boss? I bet you didn't see that coming, just like Tammy didn't. Did you cheer when Tammy got what she deserved? Or maybe you felt a little bad for her? Tell me all about it below, I really want to hear. And if you loved this story, share it with a friend. Maybe they'll like guessing Margaret's secret too, or talking about how Tammy messed up big time. Stories like this are fun to share, because they make you think and laugh and cheer all at once. This adventure with Margaret and Tammy is over, but the lesson sticks around. Sometimes the quietest person has the biggest power, and the loudest one isn't as strong as they think. Be kind, be smart, and don't judge too quick, you never know who's watching or what they can do. Margaret didn't need a cape or a loud voice to be a hero, she just needed her brain and her heart. That's pretty inspiring, isn't it? Let's take that with us and make every day a little better, just like Margaret made that flight a day to remember. Hey, friends. We've made it to the end of this awesome story, and now it's time to think about what it all means. This tale about Margaret and Tammy was full of surprises, wasn't it? So, what's the big lesson here? Let's figure it out together. It's something cool that you can carry with you every day. Think about this, sometimes the person you think is weak or small is actually the one holding all the power. That's what happened with Margaret. She was tiny, 90 years old, with shaky hands and a quiet voice. Everyone on the plane, passengers, Tammy, even the crew, thought she was just a regular old lady, someone who didn't matter much. They saw her plain sweater and her worn-out handbag and figured she couldn't do anything big. But oh, were they wrong? Margaret wasn't weak at all. She was the chairwoman of Sky High Airlines, the big boss. She had all the power, even if no one could see it at first. She didn't need to shout or fight to show it either, she just waited, watched everything Tammy did, and then, at the perfect moment, she won. That's so cool, right? Now look at Tammy. She was loud and bossy, snapping at people and acting like she was the strongest one on the plane. She thought being mean made her tough, like it put her in charge. She yelled at the mom with the baby, ignored the guy who needed help, and even slapped Margaret's arm. Tammy was sure she could do whatever she wanted, and no one would stop her. But guess what? Being mean didn't make her strong, it made her lose everything. She learned the hard way that picking on people doesn't work out. When Margaret told everyone who she really was, Tammy's big attitude fell apart. She lost her job, and no one felt sorry for her. Being mean didn't make her a winner, it made her a loser. So here's the big idea, don't judge people too fast. Next time you're quick to think someone's not important, like if they're quiet, or small, or just different, think twice. You never know who they really are. Margaret looked like a sweet old grandma, but she was the boss of a whole airline. Tammy didn't see that coming, and it got her in big trouble. Maybe the kid sitting next to you in class, the one who doesn't talk much, is super smart or really brave. Maybe the person you pass on the street has a secret talent you'd never guess. People can surprise you, just like Margaret surprised Tammy and everyone on that plane. This story makes you think, doesn't it? It's like a little reminder to be kind and give everyone a chance. Margaret didn't get mad or yell back when Tammy was rude, she stayed calm and smart. She watched and waited, and when the time was right, she showed her power. That's real strength. You don't have to be loud or pushy to be strong. You can be quiet and still win, just like Margaret did. And Tammy? She thought being mean was the way to go, but it just dug her into a hole she couldn't climb out of. Being kind is way better, it keeps you out of trouble and makes people like you more. What if we all tried to be a little like Margaret? Imagine if, next time someone's mean to you, you don't yell back, you just stay cool and figure out the smart way to handle it. Or if you see someone who looks different or quiet, you don't laugh or ignore them, you say hi and see who they really are. You might make a new friend, or find out something amazing. The world would be a nicer place if we didn't judge people so fast, right? Margaret showed us that, and it's a lesson we can use every single day at school, at home, or even on a plane. Let's think about that plane for a minute. It was just a regular flight, full of regular people, until Margaret changed everything. She didn't look like a hero, no cape, no fancy clothes, just a plain sweater and a beat-up bag. But she was a hero anyway. She stood up for what's right without making a big fuss. She didn't need to punch or shout, she used her brain and her heart. That's the kind of hero we can all be, even if we're just kids or regular people. You don't need superpowers to make things better, you just need to be fair and kind. Tammy, on the other hand, was like the opposite of a hero. She thought being loud and mean would make her important, but it backfired big time. When she slapped Margaret's arm, she thought she was showing everyone who's boss. But all she did was show how wrong she was. Margaret didn't slap back or cry, she just stood up and told the truth. And that truth was stronger than anything Tammy could do. It's like a game of rock paper scissors, kindness beats meanness every time. So, what can we take from this? Maybe it's this: be patient, be nice, and don't underestimate anyone. Margaret was patient, she didn't get mad right away, even when Tammy was rude over and over. She waited until the perfect moment to show who she was. And she was nice, she didn't yell or call Tammy names, even though Tammy deserved it. She just said what needed to be said and let justice happen. That's a smart way to live, don't you think? We can all try it, waiting a little, being kind, and giving people a chance to surprise us. Let's imagine something fun. What if you were on that plane with Margaret and Tammy? Picture yourself sitting there, maybe with a bag of pretzels, watching it all happen. You see Tammy being mean, and you feel bad for Margaret. But then bam, Margaret says she's the chairwoman, and your jaw drops. You'd probably cheer, right? Maybe you'd clap your hands or whisper to the person next to you, wow, she's the boss. It'd be like watching a movie, but better, because it's real. And after, you'd go home and tell everyone, your mom, your dad, your best friend, about the little old lady who turned out to be a big deal. That's what makes the story so great. It's not just about Margaret and Tammy, it's about us too. We all meet people every day, and we don't always know who they are. The kid who's shy at recess might be awesome at drawing. The teacher who seems strict might have a big heart. Even your little brother who bugs you might grow up to do something cool. We can't see inside people right away, so we have to give them a chance. Margaret taught us that, and it's a lesson that sticks. Let's keep going with this idea. Think about your school. There's probably someone there who's quiet, like Margaret was. Maybe they don't talk a lot or run around at lunch. Do you ever wonder about them? What if they're secretly amazing, like a hidden treasure? Next time you see them, try smiling or saying hi. You might be surprised they could turn out to be your new best friend. And if someone's mean, like Tammy, you don't have to be mean back. You can be smart and calm, like Margaret, and let things work out. It's like a secret trick. Kindness and patience can win the day. This story's got me thinking about all kinds of stuff. Like, what if Margaret hadn't said anything? What if she'd stayed quiet the whole time? Tammy might have kept being mean, and no one would have known the truth. But Margaret didn't stay quiet forever, she spoke up when it mattered most. That's brave. It's not always easy to stand up, even if you're the boss. Margaret could have just gone home and let Tammy keep her job, but she didn't. She wanted the airline to be a good place, a fair place. That's why she's so inspiring. She cared about doing the right thing. And Tammy? Poor Tammy. She had a chance to be nice, but she didn't take it. Every time she yelled or smirked, she made things worse for herself. It's kind of sad, isn't it? She could have been a good flight attendant, helping people, smiling, making the flight fun. But instead, she chose to be grumpy and rude. It's like she picked the wrong path, and it led her straight to trouble. Maybe she'll learn from it someday, but for now, she's a reminder: being mean doesn't get you far. Let's talk about power for a second. Margaret had a lot of it. She owned the airline. But she didn't use it to show off. She didn't walk onto the plane saying, "Hey, I'm the boss, listen to me." She kept it a secret until she needed it. That's smart power, the kind that waits and watches. Tammy thought power was about being loud and bossy, but that's not real power, it's just noise. Real power is quiet sometimes, like Margaret's. It's knowing you're strong without having to prove it every second. That's something we can all try, being strong inside, even if we don't shout about it. So, what's next? Well, this story's over, but the ideas aren't. We can take them with us everywhere. At home, if your sister's being annoying, you can be patient like Margaret instead of yelling. At school, if someone's picking on you, you can stay calm and smart instead of fighting back. And when you meet someone new, you can wonder, who are they really, instead of deciding right away. It's like a little toolbox: kindness, patience, and an open mind. Margaret gave us that, and it's pretty awesome. Let's imagine one more thing. What if you had a secret, like Margaret did? Maybe you're really good at something, but no one knows yet. You could be the best singer, or the fastest runner, or the funniest kid in class, but you keep it quiet, waiting for the right time to show it. Then, one day, bam, you surprise everyone. That'd be so fun, right? Margaret's story tells us we all have a little power inside, even if it's hiding. We just have to find it and use it the right way. So, what did you think of this twist? Wasn't it wild when Margaret turned out to be the boss? I bet you didn't see that coming, just like Tammy didn't. Did you cheer when Tammy got what she deserved? Or maybe you felt a little bad for her? Tell me all about it below, I really want to hear. And if you loved this story, share it with a friend. Maybe they'll like guessing Margaret's secret too, or talking about how Tammy messed up big time. Stories like this are fun to share, because they make you think and laugh and cheer all at once. This adventure with Margaret and Tammy is done, but it leaves us with something special. Sometimes the quietest person has the biggest power, and the loudest one isn't as strong as they think. Be kind, be smart, and don't judge too quick. You never know who's watching or what they can do. Margaret didn't need a cape or a loud voice to be a hero, she just needed her brain and her heart. That's pretty inspiring, isn't it? Let's take that with us and make every day a little better, just like Margaret made that flight a day to remember. Okay, let's keep going a bit more, because this is too good to stop. Think about your own life. Have you ever met someone like Tammy, someone who's loud and thinks they're the best? Maybe at the playground, or in a game, or even in your family. How do you handle them? Do you get mad and yell back, or do you stay cool like Margaret? It's not always easy to stay calm, but this story shows us it's worth it. When you're kind and patient, you come out on top, just like Margaret did. That's a superpower we can all have, no cape needed. And what about people like Margaret in your world? Maybe your grandma or grandpa is quiet but knows a lot. Maybe your teacher doesn't talk loud but always has smart ideas. They might not look big or strong, but they've got something special inside, just waiting to shine. Next time you're with them, ask them a question, see what they say. You might learn something cool, like how Margaret taught Tammy a lesson without even trying hard. This story's got so many fun pieces, doesn't it? There's the plane, the mean flight attendant, the secret notebook, and that big moment when Margaret said, "I'm the boss." It's like a puzzle that fits together perfectly. Every part matters: the waiting, the watching, the winning. It's not just a story to read and forget, it's a story to think about and talk about. What's your favorite part? Was it when Tammy got shocked, or when everyone cheered for Margaret? I bet you've got lots to say. Let's wrap it up with one last thought. Margaret's secret wasn't just that she was the chairwoman, it was that she knew how to be strong the right way. She didn't need to be loud or mean to win. She used her smarts and her kindness, and that's what made her awesome. We can do that too. Every day, we can choose to be a little like Margaret, calm, kind, and ready to surprise the world. So go out there, be your best self, and who knows? Maybe you'll be the next big surprise someone never sees coming.